All right. So, so I put this together um, slideshow as a way to kind of document my thoughts and my ideas about this Y chromosome business. Um, and I'll be the first to say I'm in no way, shape, or form an expert on it. I have ideas, I have thoughts, and so this is a way for me to catalog those. You know, the internet has become the new uh, ever evolving journal. So, it's, I think, beneficial for people to record their ideas and their thought processes and to keep a log of their progress even. Um, you know, so to me, this is not something I'm doing to be accepted by someone, if you will. It's just information for informational purposes only. And the ideas that I express here, I got to give credit to other people because they have been, uh, I guess, forerunners, if you will, in basically fitting this data into a biblical worldview. One of those being, I believe he was the first one I heard speaking on this, which kind of piqued my interest, was Yehoshua ben Ephraim. Shout out to that brother. Shout out to the brothers over at Genesis 49er channel. Orthodox Moore, Yeshu, who runs that channel. Orthodox Moore has his own channel. The brother Ivrit, who has a channel that is called, what is his name? Hebrew of Israel, I believe. Another sister over there, I cannot remember her name. And I think there's another brother by the name of Sean who shows up from time to time and adds his input as well. But they're very thorough over there. They go over a lot of information, and much of what they do is, is appreciated, I would say, on my end because they really do delve into this information. So again, I'm a novice. This is some of this stuff is familiar to me because I do have a bachelor's degree in biology. That's what I went to school for, general biology. Um, you know, work as a chemist basically for a nutritional supplement company. Um, and so I run the HPLC and the GC machine over there. But, I'll be honest, a lot of these statistical models that they construct based on the data and the findings that they have, they're not easy to understand, man. But I figure the more I dig into it and the more I dive into it, the more palatable it will be and the more understandable it will be. And that's not to say by any stretch that I agree with everything that is proposed by modern science, but I do agree that chromosomes are a real thing. The Y chromosome is something that is uh, thoroughly advantageous in tracing lineage because of the structure and how it is passed from father to son relatively unchanged. So it's a good measure of which of these three sons of Noah you come from, if indeed we're viewing it through a biblical lens. And I know some people, they have 1 foot in and 1 foot out. They feel like the Bible's telling a half truth here, or it wasn't a global flood, or everybody didn't come from Noah, yada yada yada, which I stand against. I stand on the scriptures, period. And whatever the scriptures say, that's what it is. So I'm fitting that within the biblical worldview. Um, so if Y chromosomal Adam is the person which every male descend and female descend from, then naturally, if you understand the biblical narrative, that would have to be Noah. And we'll address some of the misconceptions about the flood just in the opening couple slides. But the question remains: who was Ham, who was Shem, and who was Japheth, right? So let's get into that. Here, I would like to just point out a couple things. Japheth, looking at his uh, how he organized these haplogroups. Again, Noah, you have A, you have B, you have C and F, and then you have D, E, right? And I believe A and B evolved, for lack of a better term, together. That's one lineage. I believe CF is one lineage, and I believe DE is one lineage, making three lineages that descend from Y chromosomal Adam. Now, why do I say they have them listed here separately, but why do I say AB is its own particular line of descent? If you just look here, you get a couple clues, and I'm not saying that this is absolute or my ideas are the quote unquote gospel. I am saying though that this is what I see. This is what I see, right? So when we're talking about haplogroup CT, which is CF and DE together, you have to acknowledge this. Men who carry the CT clade have a Y chromosome with the SMP mutation M168, along with P9.1 and M294. These mutations are present in all modern male lineages except A and B, right? So A and B do not have these mutations. These do. You understand? So, which are found both almost exclusively in Africa. Wink, wink, hint, hint, right? And when you look at haplogroup DE, what you see is another uh, insertion or another mutation that separates DE from the rest of those haplogroups, right? It says haplogroup DE is a wire jumping down here. The most well-known unique event polymorphism that defines DE is the Y chromosome ALU polymorphism, YAP. The mutation was caused when a strand of DNA known as the ALU inserted a copy of itself into the Y chromosome. Hence, all Y chromosomes belonging to DE, DE, and their subclades are YAP positive. All chromosomes that belong to other haplogroups and subclades are YAP negative. So this is the only, this and everything downstream of it is YAP positive. None of these are YAP positive. So that's another thing that separates DE from CF and all of its downstream clades. And as we have already seen, A and B are separated by mutations that they do not carry, but CF and DE do. All right. So I'm saying AB is one group found predominantly in Africa. DE is another group found, in Africa and across the Middle East and, even up into Oceania. These islands back here, Japan, uh, the Andaman Islands, so on and so forth. And then you have CF, which is pretty much found just about everywhere. Just about everywhere. And we'll, look into a little bit of that. So I just want to make that distinction. And if I haven't said that, which I think I have, well, no, I haven't. I'm saying AB is Ham. AB and everything downstream is Ham. CF and everything downstream is Japhet. And DE and everything downstream is Shem. That's what I'm saying. That's not what others say, but that's what I'm saying. And again, those ideas are not unique to me, um, to the people I gave credit to before. They have been espousing these ideas for some time now. So moving on. And this is just to point out the fact that, you know, Yes, the flood was a worldwide cataclysmic event, and it was not just a local thing that happened in order to make clear that I stand on the biblical precedent. It says Genesis 6 and 12, and God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. And God said unto Noah, the end of all flesh is come before me. The earth is filled with violence through them. And behold, I will destroy them with the earth. But with thee will I establish my covenant. And thou shalt come into the ark, thou and thy sons, and thy wife, and thy sons' wives with thee. For yet 7 days, and I will cause it to rain upon the earth. 40 days and 40 nights. And every living substance that I have made will I destroy from off the face of the earth. In the selfsame day entered Noah and Shem and Ham and Japheth and the sons of Noah and Noah's wife and the three wives of his sons with them into the ark. Genesis 7 and 21. And all flesh died that moved upon the earth. That's pretty clear. Both of fowl and of cattle and of beast and of every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. And every man, all in whose nostrils was the breath of life, of all that was in the dry land died, and every living thing, every living substance was destroyed, which was upon the face of the ground, both man and cattle, and the creeping things, and the fowl of heaven, and they were destroyed from off the earth. And Noah only remained alive, and they that were with him in the ark. Right? So it's only Noah and his three sons and their wives. That's 8 people. Right? So I want to highlight and focus on the sons of Noah here. And it says, and the sons of Noah that went forth from the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and Ham is the father of Canaan. Excuse that. These are the three sons of Noah, and of them was the whole earth overspread. Right? The whole earth. Not some of it, not a portion of it, but the entire earth was overspread. And excuse the uh, lack of verses here. Let's see if I can. Now, these are the generations of the sons of Ham. Excuse me, these are the generations of the sons of Noah. This is actually Genesis 10, not Genesis 9. So this is 10 and 1. Right now, these are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and unto them were sons born after the flood. The sons, verse 2, Genesis 10 and 2. The sons of Japheth, Gomer, and Magog, and Madai, and Javan, and Tubal, and Meshach, and Tiras. Right? By these were the isles of the Gentiles divided in their lands, every one after his tongue, after their families, in their nations. Genesis 10 and 5. Now I want to focus on Madai, because if I'm saying that Japheth and all of his descendants would be haplogroup CF and downstream, then it will follow that Madai, who we know, many of us, to be the mighty and powerful Medes who go back to Japheth, should be downstream of CF. right? And the reason I'm using Madai is because there is scholarly consensus that the modern day Iranians are the descendants of the Medes. So Madai being the Median empire, we should find continuity in the genetics and the culture and the language with the people of Iraq, the modern people of Iran, excuse me. I said Iraq, I meant Iran. All right. So Madai equals ancient Medes equals the modern Iranians. And let's just look to show Strong's H4074 Madai, Media, or Medes, or Madai, Middle Land, a people descendant from the son of Japheth who inhabited the territory of Media, a land inhabited by the descendants of Japheth, located northwest Persia of Persia proper and southwest of the Caspian Sea, east of Armenia and Assyria, and west and northwest of the Great Salt Desert of Iran. All right. So I just, obviously you can, AI is very useful. You can go and it'll answer your questions for you. So I just typed in, hey, are the modern Iranians related at all to the ancient Medes? And we get a resounding yes. Modern Iranians are related to the ancient Medes, right? Both linguistically and genetically, contemporary Iranians share deep ancestral ties with this ancient Indo-European civilization that helped establish the foundational empire of the Iranian plateau. The relationship between the ancient Medes and modern Iranians breaks down into three key connections. All right, genetic continuity, linguistic ties, and we're moving on. I'm not going to read all of this. Cultural absorption, right? Uh, I'll read this one. Cyrus the Great, who had both Persian and Median heritage, united the two peoples in the 6th century BCE. The Medes and Persians were seen as the twin pillars of the Achaemenid Empire. Over time, as empires shifted, the Medes were largely absorbed into the broader Persian and broader Iranian identity. Now, they're citing Facebook and all of this stuff, but this can be researched very easily in world history and encyclopedias and such. Today, the heritage of the Medes belongs to all Iranians and neighboring Iranic groups, such as the Kurds, who trace significant portion of their distinct heritage to the Medes, cementing their role as fundamental ancestors to the diverse mosaic of modern Iran. Now, what I do want to say is that, and I plan on doing a video on this, is admixture is different from haplogroups. Admixture occurs on your other 22 autosomal pairs, right? We have 23 chromosomes. The Y chromosome or the X chromosome do not undergo recombination. So there is no admixture on the Y chromosome, which what makes or the mitochondrial DNA, which is what makes them extremely accurate and potent in determining direct maternal and paternal lineage. Admixture, on the other hand, happens when two groups get together and they mate and they, create some your autosomes undergo meiosis and mitosis. They recombine, and you have a mixture of both groups, right? But that does not confer direct lineage from any particular, or it doesn't relay direct lineage from any particular male or female. It just means that two groups got together and had children, and the two groups had an admixture event that produced those children. who those children descend from still depends on who the male was and who the female was. And so, like I say, I plan to do a video on that because most people confuse admixture for relation. And there is a degree of relation to admixture, obviously, but what admixture cannot tell you is who your father is. It cannot tell you who your mother is. It can just tell you what populations mixed, and admixture can be washed out over time if you continue to mix. What happens is those segments of DNA that you acquire from one population or another tend to get smaller and smaller and smaller. So you can wash out ancient admixture through continual mixing of populations, right? So moving on. Modern Iranian DNA represents a deep, long-standing genetic continuity stretching back over the last 5,000 to 10,000 years. The majority of the Iranian gene pool, 70 to 90%, can be traced directly back to early Neolithic farmers from the Zagros Mountains, with later foundational contribution from Indo-Iranian steppe migrants and Anatolian farmers. And we'll get into some of that too. I'm going to bring up two of Japheth's children in addressing some of the misconceptions about, uh, you know, I guess there are some doctrines around that discuss Noah and all his progeny being white skinned, and the only quote unquote black skinned son of Noah was Canaan because he was cursed. I'm not mistaken, that's the Jehovah's Witness doctrine. And it could be even a Mormon doctrine, but we'll get into a little bit of that too, because they've already uncovered who certain groups were, and they've actually went into detail uh, and genetically confirmed what some of those groups look like. And so, being that we're dealing with the sons of Japheth, it's only right that we touch on that. So, understanding your DNA results, blah blah blah. Um, Zagros Neolithic, the foundation of the Iranian gene pool, was derived from early farmers and hunter-gatherers who lived in the Zagros Mountains thousands of years ago. Right? Eurasian steppe. Migrations from the Eurasian steppe introduced Indo-Iranian language families and genetics such as R1A, the paternal haplogroup that is downstream of CF, as we would expect from sons of Japheth. Anatolian farmers and Caucasus. Contributions from the Anatolian farmer and Caucasus hunter-gatherers round out the regional genetic mix. So you should expect to see some, what is that, I or O haplogroup there, right? And, I just included a little bit extra here. They've got videos on that. But what is the Iranian DNA look like? That's the question. And here are the points. Again, we've already shown that Madai and the ancient Medes are modern Iranians. I'm saying that CF is Japheth. So the seed of Japheth cannot be a descendant of E and J. Those are two separate lineages. Japheth is upstream from R, G, J, Q, and L, right? And if we look over here, we'll see, I'll just read this. It said modern Iranian DNA shows highly diverse paternal lineage, reflecting the region's geography as a historical crossroad between the Middle East, Central Asia, and Caucasus. The most common haplogroups among Iranians are J2 and R1A, though frequencies vary by significantly by ethnicity and region. Right? The primary Y-DNA haplogroups: haplogroup J, haplogroup R, haplogroup G, haplogroups E, Q, L, and J. Now, all of these fit into the idea that Japheth, if he is CF, his children should be downstream of CF except for E. E does not fit. Why is that? Because again, you cannot be downstream from CF and be E. So Q, L, J1, G2, R1, R1B, A and B, J1 and J2 are all downstream from CF. E is a totally separate lineage, right? It says these are found at low to moderate frequencies. Haplogroup E is often tied to Afro-Asiatic or Arabian lineages. Q is linked to Central Asian, Turkic, and historical migrations. And L is an older lineage indigenous to the broader region. So far, the Iranian people are shown to a high degree, 5 to 10. So let's just say 10%, 35%, 60%, and whatever, 65%, and then whatever percentages these are. 65, I don't know how many Iranians have haplogroup E, but probably close to 95% of them are downstream from CF. All right. So this is what I'm saying. This is what I'm saying. And we could just take a quick look. This is Y full, right? Y chromosomal atom you see here. A and B are their own haplogroups. D and E are their own haplogroups. And CF, as you can see, you have F, G, H, I, J, K, right? All of these, P, M, S, R, K, N, O, right? All right. So let us see. And I guess I can, just for good measure, pull this up. Well, I'll do that later. Um, so, and again, some of this stuff, these are templates that I just threw slides on, and I don't know why I left that there, but it's there, engaging the audience, right? So, Atzi is 92% Anatolian. Remember, they're saying the Iranians are a mixture of Anatolian, steppe, and hunter-gatherers. Atzi is an Anatolian, right? 10 years after the first analysis of Atzi's genome, improved sequencing technology has now enabled a research team from the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology and URAC research to reconstruct the Iceman's genetic makeup much more accurately. It shows that he had darker skin than previously thought, was most likely bald, and only 8% of his genes are of European ancestry. Again, that's speaking to admixture. It's not speaking to his haplotype. You can't be 8% Y chromosome, Y chromosomal G, or Y chromosomal I. You have to be 100% because the Y chromosome does not get changed, and that's how we trace paternal lineage. So archaeogeneticist Johannes Krauss and anthropologist Albert Zink explain the findings. Let's take a look at this. This is some of the information contained in that article. Back when Otts lived, so this gentleman is going through asking the researcher a question. He said, back when Otts lived, could it have been possible that all the people in the area had a similar skin tone? Maybe, Krauss says. We studied a contemporaneous population in northern Italy, a little south of South Tyrol, where we found a similar genetic composition to Otzi's. So you can imagine that he had a darker skin tone, that a darker skin tone was also common there. In general, early farmers had relatively dark skin, but not as dark as the hunter-gatherers who lived in Europe before them. That's an important thing to know, right? Because this, I mean, dark, yeah, I guess you could say he's relatively dark. They lightened him up here, but I mean, anybody who wears t-shirts know. Well, his brother, this guy need to put some clothes on. But anybody who wears t-shirts know, your arms tend to be darker, uh, and your face tends to be darker because you're exposed to the sun. Now, I don't know if this guy wore t-shirts or not. I doubt it. But anyway, the point is, he tends to be a little darker around his extremities and his face, right? But not as dark as the hunter-gatherers who we're going to explore, uh, who are also downstream of CF, right? Who lived in Europe before them. These hunter-gatherers would have had blue eyes and such dark skin that genetically speaking, we cannot distinguish them from the people south of the Sahara today. Hmm, interesting. This is a very useful phenotype, quite different from the way we have until now imagined the original Europeans. Right? Okay. By the late Bronze Age, people in Europe were getting lighter very quickly. In fact, there is hardly a gene that has spread as fast as the genes for light skin color in Europe. We'll explore that as well. We suspect this has to do with vitamin D and the change from hunting and gathering to farming. Early farmers took in very little vitamin D with their diet. However, humans can also produce the vitamin in their skin because of a precursor which reacts to penetrating UV light. Low pigmentations allow more UV light to penetrate. So, there was an advantage for light skin to survive in a Europe which was quite dark with little sunlight in winter, especially if you were a farmer. With Otzi, this development had not yet been reflected, perhaps because he lived in southern Europe or because within his population there was still enough vitamin D from the diet at the time through fish and meat, for example. Now, I would tend to say Otzi is not as white as a quote unquote white as a Norwegian, but he's significantly lighter than your lightest so-called South African, as they put it, significantly lighter. So, I have my own theories as to why light or white skin spread, and I'll provide, some anecdotal evidence to that. Moving on, let's see. I see the Iceman belonged to paternal haplogroup G2A, downstream of CF. So this would be a Gentile. This would be a son of Japheth, believe it or not. Specifically the subclade G2A2B, formerly G2A4. This ancient genetic lineage reflects the migration of the very first Neolithic farmers who brought agriculture from the Near East to Europe around 8,000 years ago. This is a Neolithic farmer, right? Specific clade. Otzi's exact Y chromosomal group is GL91, a part of the larger GM201 lineage. Modern distribution. While his lineage is rare in modern and Central Europe, genetic relatives of haplogroup G2A are most frequently found in isolated mountainous regions today, with the highest concentration existing in Sardinia and Corsica. Genetic uniqueness. While his pattern haplogroup is tied to early farmers, a landmark ancient DNA analysis revealed that Otzi's specific Z6208 paternal line is highly unique. In fact, his exact Y DNA and his mitochondrial DNA haplogroup K1F have never been matched to any other ancient or modern individuals, making his genetic lineage an evolutionary dead end. Very interesting. They have not found any uh, blend of K1F and G2A Z76 Z6208. So they haven't found any two people with those specific maternal and paternal lineages. This is the source for the article that I was reading before. This is actually a post from, uh, you know, inquiring from Google what his specific chromosome was. Right now, Cheddar Man is actually the hunter-gatherer that existed in Western Europe before Otz and his people came to penetrate that land. Right, Cheddar Man is the first Briton. And of course, this sparked a bit of outrage in people because, you know, how could the first Briton be this dark? Well, when you understand the, uh, I guess when you understand the amount of variety or, uh, I forget what you call it, when you understand the amount of diversity that exists in the genetic spectrum. And when you understand that dark skin is actually the default and light skin is actually the uh, mutant form, and that's not to disparage anybody, but it is absolutely um, not default. Dark skin is the default of all humans. And so it makes sense that this son of Japheth, and probably for many millennia, the initial sons of Japheth looked or had this skin tone, right? And here's some information about him. Genetic markers of skin pigmentation, and yes, they can usually associate it with sub-Saharan Africa, right? This is something that they can absolutely determine. So, you know, and we'll see this kind of had people in the uproar because they did not like the fact that Britain was inhabited by quote unquote black people, right? But moving on. Cheddar Man, Britain's oldest nearly complete human skeleton dating back approximately 10,000 years, carried the paternal Y haplogroup of IS2524, which is a descendant of subclave I2A. This haplogroup indicates ancient European lineage belonging to Western hunter-gatherers who repopulated Northwest Europe after the last ice age. So he's IS2524. His maternal haplogroup is U5B1. And based on DNA sequencing, researchers from the Natural History Museum discovered that Cheddar Man most likely had striking blue eyes, dark brown to black curly hair, and dark to black skin. Son of Japhet here, right? And you can see their wanderings from this, chart. And this is compliments of YouTube, Wikipedia, excuse me, right? Here you see on Y full, see Cheddar Man right here. And these indicate ancient DNAs, right? So moving on. Now this, back in 2001, is what they wanted you to believe Cheddar Man looked like. I don't know why they put boils on my man's face. Uh, Maybe because they understood he would have got cooked by the sun. I don't know what that is. But this is what Cheddar Man used to look like before they dug a little deeper into his genome and found out what he had: blue eyes and dark skin and dark curly hair. Now, I wouldn't necessarily call that dark curly hair. That looked like the man got on a damn wig. But nonetheless, it is dark. Looks pretty straight to me, but whatever, right? And so, what's the problem? What's the problem, right? This is under a YouTube video that went into, and we'll watch that momentarily here, that went into why Cheddar Man was uh, a problem for some people. The revealing of Cheddar Man, right? So this is a trope that people, you know, default to when they realize that some people who aren't sub-Saharan, quote unquote, are still black people, right? And that's what happens when you don't trace your lineage genetically to, in my estimation, the table of nations. You get caught up in these little social created groupings that don't attest to your real lineage. Sub-Saharan is just an area. It's not a people. And I want to do a video on that as well, where we're talking about who actually lives in that area and how they may or may not be related, right? So here's another one. Cheddar Man's recent depiction is due to current politics, right? It wasn't a problem when Cheddar Man was viewed as a white skinned son of Japheth, but when he was uh, actually proven to be a dark skinned son of Japheth, then it was due to politics. Okay. Why were no other depigmentation alleles taken into account? The only ones we already know who we know no WHG had, Western hunter gatherer. Is that science or is that propaganda? The serious problem with science is corruption. Corruption competing for or to maintain funding research. Corruption, i.e., falsification of data submitted to and accepted by established scientific journals. Corruption to increase personal scientific recognition. And so it is with the sheer nonsense of claiming facial characteristics, eye color, skin color. It's corruption to gain recognition within the scientific community and towards future projects for funding research. So it seems like Mr. Philip Dawes doesn't understand that there are alleles that they can test that will actually tell you the likelihood or the likely skin color of the quote unquote skeleton or of the living person. This is actual science. So you have to take that with the uh, entire process of advancing science. And this is the person who generated the video that we're going to watch, who right here is responding to him, who I think changed their name. It said, it's sad you can't see the science behind your own politics. And I would direct that to all of these individuals, right? They have a agenda that they'd like to see perpetrated through the earth, but when science uh, confronts their agenda and proves their agenda or their ideals to be nothing more than a fantasy, then it's a problem, right? So we know what the problem is, but let's just watch this video. Let's see what my man got to say. Be a little slow here. You can go and check out this Paul Whitewick's channel. Boy, this sure is moving slow. But let's come back.
Early Brits were not blue-eyed blondes, but instead had dark skin and dark curly hair.
Fast forward to the 2010s and we continue to have a better understanding of DNA sequencing. 2018, Dr. Selina Brace.
I work in a specialised ancient DNA laboratory at the NHM.
Extracted some DNA from the Cheddar Man, an ancient DNA specialist and researcher. Now the location of Cheddar Man's remains within that cave system did a really good job of preserving it, sort of relative to the 10,000 year period that it had been there, and with some very careful techniques and managed to remove some DNA from, I believe it's skull and an inner ear bone, very dense material, good for preserving that kind of DNA. Now I've written in my script, the results were very surprising. I'm not convinced they were. The process was part of a larger study at the time which looked at a number of individuals specifically designed to explore the transition between the Mesolithic hunter-gatherers and the Neolithic farmers. The first thing this highlighted was that the genetic signature of these two groups was very different. We kind of already knew that the Neolithic people brought across from Europe their farming practices, a very different group of people. But back to Cheddar Man himself, well, there's some really curious things that we learnt about him from the sequencing results, not least he was lactose intolerant. He couldn't have digested any kind of milk, dairy sort of product, and that really does add up because of obviously the life he led, hunter-gatherer. The real controversy for some came when they were able to describe his physical features.
This is what people looked like in Western Europe and Britain 10,000 years ago, not what we would have expected.
It was predicted to have dark brown.
Now, what impetus would these people have to lie about that? What could they possibly gain politically from saying Cheddar Man was a so-called dark-skinned, quote-unquote, black man? Right? Because black is just a skin color. It has no relation whatsoever to paternal ancestry. Right? But people get caught up in their feelings when certain things are unearthed and certain truths are brought forward. You know, people get caught up in their feelings.
To black hair, blue or blue-green eyes, and dark to dark black skin pigmentation. By her own words, Dr. Selina Brace suggested that this did indeed cause...
That's hair is straight as a ruler, man. It's not curly hair. I don't know what the hell. If anything, that's the cap right there. When you say curly hair and you try to put that wig on that man, no. I ain't buying it. But anyway.
Was the most issue the skin colour. The media in fact ran with this pretty much rather than anything else. Human skin pigmentation is a deep dive in its own right. There are many genes and gene variants, a vast amount that affect it, and there's probably a lot that we don't yet know of and don't know how they affect it themselves. A system called HRS-Plex-S was used to help predict the features, the eye, the hair, the skin pigmentation. This is the same system that is used today in forensic work. This system finds various SNPs, SNPs, in the DNA signatures of the genome. The probability scoring system did indeed give Dr. Selina Brace and her team the confidence to suggest that Cheddar Man did indeed have dark brown to black skin and really light eye features. For Dr. Selina Brace and her team, well, this sequencing result wasn't really a surprise. There was many sequencing results from the genomes of Mesolithic hunter-gatherers from across mainland Europe, Spain, Hungary, that all had similar results, darker skin and lighter coloured eyes.
In many of the people across Europe, darker skin and lighter eyes is just what it is. These are the sons of Japheth.
The trouble is, we don't really tend to talk about that, and it certainly wasn't reported when this news story first broke. We often see in the headlines and videos of all kinds of media sentences like Cheddar Man's haplogroup is, and we want to align ourselves with these ancestry markers. Mitochondrial DNA and Y-DNA grab all of the headlines that we see from this story, and therefore it's quite easy to see how people just assume that these are describing physical traits of that person. However, mitochondrial DNA and the Y-DNA, whilst powerful for genealogy and migration studies, they aren't great for explaining physical attributes.
That's right. Because those are found, phenotypic traits are found on the autosomal DNA. They're not found on the Y chromosome. Y chromosome and mitochondrial DNA are solely productive for tracing ancestry direct lineage.
Think of mitochondrial and Y-DNA as tracing just one family surname. They tell us about ancestry lines, but they don't explain eye colour or skin tone. That comes from the SNPs in the rest of the genome. This 2018 study by the Natural History Museum and the UCL specifically tested SNPs from these pigmentation genes, and that's how they were led to the conclusion of the physical features. Nothing from his mitochondrial DNA U5 or his Y DNA I2A contributed to that. So here's the thing for me, the one thing that really is often missed: the uncertainty of the prediction of the Cheddar Man's pigmentation is based around his genetics simply don't exist anymore. One thing we can say for certain is his ancestry is very different from anyone alive today, and his pigmentation genetics are also very different from anyone alive today.
In that region, it's not different from anyone alive. You got people in the landmass of Africa that have very dark skin and water, Caribbean blue eyes. So anyway, I wanted to bring that out because it seems to be a problem for many people, as you can see. But what is the problem? The problem is that you couldn't, or you can't for a moment imagine a world in which the people who live in the area that you call home were once black skinned. Doesn't matter if they're why would they be sub-Saharan Africa in Western Europe? Of course they're not sub-Saharan African. It's Western Europe. Most of the people you call sub-Saharan African didn't even originate there. That's just a modern trope that we use to try and confine them to that area because that's where their population density is the most predominant there. Doesn't mean they originated there. And again, I'll probably do a video on that, but this is just me uncovering certain layers that exist in the genetic spectrum, right? All right, so this is a, kind of a, and here's the article. This is kind of a prelude to what happened to the skin pigmentation. And I may have to break this up into probably 2 videos because we're working on an hour now here. But I wanted to cover this. This is not the article. Where is this article? So I will figure out which article this is. Let's see, this is the same one. Let's see, is this the article we looking at? I'm not a robot. Okay. Come on with it. Computer's quite slow, but I just want to make sure I am sourcing all of this information for people who are interested. Yes, this is the same article, and this is a good article about admixture. A very good article about it. It's short, it's to the point, and it gives you a base understanding of how admixture work and genetic drift and recombination and how certain things get fixed in a population, right? So this is the article. It's called Human Evolution When Admixture Met Selection, and I'm just going to cite a portion of the article. It says, using their approach, Davy and colleagues identified two key targets of recent selection in European: skin pigmentation and immunity. At first sight, this finding seems hardly surprising, as both traits, as well as the specific loci identified, SLC 24A5, HERC, and HLAE, are well-known targets of natural selection. And in addition, plenty of striking examples of loci affected by these selections in admixed populations have been reported by now. They include particular mutation in the DARC locus that confers resistance to some forms of malaria, and increased dramatically in the admixed population of Santiago Island and of Capo Verde over just 20 generations, are a Denisovian haplotype of the EPAS1 gene that confers adaptation to low oxygen pressure at high altitude, which swept to near fixation among the Tibetans. But the story got considerably more interesting once Davy and colleagues started to dissect the ancestry contributions to these traits. As it turns out, the skin pigmentation phenotype of modern Europeans is a perfect example of the power of admixture in laying the genetic foundation for selection. Of the two high effect pigmentation variants identified as major targets of selection, the one in the SLC24A5 gene arose in the Anatolian early farmers. Who is that? That's your boy Otzi, right? So the pigmentation, or the loss of pigmentation, arose in the Anatolian early farmers. That's why when we looked at Otzi, he was fairly lighter than the Western European Cheddar Man, who had blue eyes. Why? Because the one HERC gene in the European hunter-gatherers, respectively, this is what contributes to eye color, the HERC gene, and were only brought together in the admixed population. To make the story complete, the third high-effect locus, SLC45A2, arrived in Europe a few thousand years later through an admixture event, this time triggered by the expansion of pastoralist people from the Pontic Caspian steppe. Now let's just take a quick look at this. SLC 45A2 gene, a gene that makes a protein involved in making melanin. Now everybody has melanin in varying amounts. Some people express eumelanin in high degrees. Those are darker skinned people, darker pigmented people, and some people express pheomelanin in higher degrees than eumelanin. Those are lighter skinned people, but there's a common trope that only so-called black people have melanin. That is not the case. A pigment that gives skin color, gives color to the skin, hair, and eye. Mutations or changes in the SLC45A2 gene have been found in an inherited condition called oculocutaneous albinism. Oculocutaneous albinism, that's light eyes. People with this condition have very pale skin and light-colored hair and eyes. They also have a high risk of developing skin cancer at an early age. All right, so a mutation in this gene gives you light skin, light eyes, and increased risk to skin cancer, right? What about this one? SLC24A5. We'll pull up, what is this, a Wikipedia? Okay, the light-skinned allele of SLC24A5 in South Asians and Europeans share identity by descent. So I'm not going to read all of this, but basically it's another allele that can be mutated to produce lighter skin in humans. It says skin pigmentation is one of the most variable phenotypic traits in humans. A non-synonymous substitution, RS142 6654, in the third exon of the SLC24A5 accounts for lighter skin in Europeans, but not in East Asians. All right, so why am I showing all of these? Because it's clear here that you can test for variations or mutations in these loci and determine what the skin color of the person was. This is the HERC gene, HERC complex, HERC2 uh, is a giant E3 ubiquitin protein ligase implicated in DNA repair and regulation, pigmentation, and neurological disorders. It is encoded by a gene of the same name belonging to the HERC family, which typically encodes large protein products with C-terminus HEC domains and one or more RCC-like domains, right? HERC2, previously referred to as the RJS gene locus, was first identified in 1990 as the gene responsible for two phenotypes in mice: the runty, jerky, sterile RJS phenotype and the juvenile development and fertility 2 JDF2 phenotype. Mutant alleles are known to cause hypopigmentation in pink eye phenotypes, as well as reduced growth, jerky gait, male sterility, female semi-sterility, and maternal behavioral defects in mice. Now, they've discovered the same thing in humans, right? Nonetheless, the ancestral allele is associated with darker pigmentation and dominant over the light pigmentation recessive allele, right? HERC2 genes contain a silencing sequence that can exhibit expression of the OCA2, and if two copies of the recessive allele are present, can result in blue eyes. This genotype is present in almost all people with blue eyes and is hypothesized as being the founder mutation of blue eyes in humans. So just like white skin, if you will, quote unquote, white skin is recessive, so are blue eyes. The default is dark skin and dark eyes. So the default for the sons of Japheth would be what you see in your man Cheddar, right? And this is another article that can that goes into. I don't want to read all of this. This is another article that was talking about, and maybe I'll read a little bit of it down here. It was talking about Cheddar Man and Neanderthal sequencing. Let me see. No. Down here, where it gets into how these three groups came together to produce the population or the populace that you see uh, in the genetic continuity that you see in Europe today, right? Yeah, down here. And I'll come back to this. But another recent study by Yassine Soulmini and colleagues also looked at ancient DNA data relevant for European admixture events, but focused on identifying signals of selective sweeps in each one of the three source populations: European hunter-gatherers, that's your boy Cheddar; Anatolian early farmers, that's your boy Otz; and steppe pastoralists. The so-called hard selective sweeps denote the classic view of adaptation by selection. A beneficial mutation arises in a population, is lucky enough to escape the strong genetic drift affecting low frequency variants, and is brought to rapid fixation by selection, while pulling along neutral but linked markers. This leads to a massive reduction in genetic diversity over a long stretch of a chromosome. While demographic effects can complicate their identification, patterns of hard selective sweeps are still considered relatively easy to identify. Yet surprisingly few have been found in modern human populations, where episodes of fast adaptation thus rare during our recent evolution, or did selection only target phylogenetic traits for which no single locus experienced a hard sweep? Excuse me, I'm butchering this name. Soulimi and colleagues now think otherwise. When looking for signals of hard selective sweeps in the ancient source populations of modern Europeans, they actually found many. Too many to conclude that hard selective sweeps were rare in human evolution. Rather, they concluded that genetic mixing that followed admixture masked the signals of previous sweeps, rendering them undetectable in modern genomes. Right? So, how do certain uh, phenotypes get fixed in a population is the question, right? And they're saying hard selective sweeps. I have a theory on how so-called white skin got hard fixed into, because again, these are recessive genetics, and there's nothing wrong with it. It is what it is. But we have to be honest, it's recessive. So how does a recessive gene get fixed into a population, right? And I have my theories on that, which I'll share some of this. And this is a book called, and this is just a backdrop of my idea, right? This is a book called The Masters and the Slaves by a gentleman named, I should have included a picture of it, by a gentleman named Gilberto Frey. It's called The Masters and the Slaves, a study in the development of Brazilian civilization. It's a really good book. I haven't even read it all. It's so much stuff in here. He has a glossary in the back that goes over a lot of stuff, but he's just talking about the development of Brazilian society and how it came about. And I think he uncovered, or he spoke about, some very interesting information there, right? Very interesting. I wish I could make this smaller. But it said, I'll start here. It was my studies in anthropology, and this is my thought process on how certain phenotypes get fixed into a population. Yes, it's natural selection, but it's also cognitive natural selection by preference, right? So when you have I'll just read. It was my studies in anthropology under the direction of Professor Boaz that first revealed to me the Negro and the mulatto for what they are, with the effects of environment or cultural experience separated from racial characteristics. I learned to regard as fundamental the difference between race and culture, to discriminate between the effects of purely genetic relationships and those resulting from social influences, the cultural heritage, and the milieu. It is upon this criterion of the basic differentiation between race and culture that the entire plan of this essay rests, as well as upon the distinction to be made between racial and family heredity. And that's something people have lost sight of. They think because of your phenotype, you can be classified into a particular racial category, but that is not at all the case. That is not at all the case. You have to use paternal and maternal lineages to be classified in racial, quote unquote, racial categories, because if race is a thing, we're all human. So we're a part of the quote unquote human race. But if biblical lineage is a thing, then we're all a part of different families based upon descent, maternal or paternal descent. Excuse me. It goes on to say, however little inclined we may be to historical materialism, which is so often exaggerated in its generations, chiefly in works by sectarians and fanatics, we must admit the considerable influence, even though not always a preponderant one, exerted by the technique of economic production upon the structure of societies and upon the features of the moral physiogenomies. Right? It is an influence subject to the reaction of other influences, yet powerful as no other in its ability to make aristocracies or democracies out of societies and to determine tendencies toward polygamy, monogamy, toward stratification or mobility. Studies in eugenics and cacogenics are still in a state of flux, and much of what excuse me, and much of what is supposed to be the result of heredity, characteristics, or tears ought rather be ascribed to the persistence for generations of economic and social conditions favorable or unfavorable to human development. It is Franz Boas who, admitting the possibility that eugenics may be able to eliminate the undesirable elements of a society, reminds us that eugenic selection should concern itself with suppressing the conditions responsible for the creation of poverty-stricken proletariats, sickly and ill-nourished, and he further reminds us that so long as the conditions exist, the result can only be the creation of more proletariats for the same sort. And so he goes on to talk about his impetus for writing this book. And the interesting thing in connection with these differences, the exceptional case naturally being excluded, is to determine to what point they are heredity or genetic and to what point they cease to be, becoming instead the reflection of a favorable or unfavorable succession of economic conditions. So he's talking about the differences in mental characteristics between one social group and another, but I want to get into the physical differences and how those came about in Brazil and use that as a backdrop to explain that this is how certain traits can get fixed into a population relatively quickly, right? In Brazil, the relations between the white and the colored races from, uh-oh, okay, I went backwards. That's not right. Okay. In Brazil, the relations between the white and the colored races from the first half of the 16th century were conditioned on one hand by the system of economic production, monoculture, and latifundia, and on the other hand by the scarcity of white women among the conquerors. Right? Sugar raising not only stifled the democratic industries represented by the trade in Brazil wood and hides, and it sterilized the land for the forces of the diversified farming and herd for a broad expanse around the plantations. It called for an erroneous number of slaves, cattle raising. Meanwhile, with the possibilities it afforded for a democratic way of life was relegated to the backlands. In the agrarian zone, along with the monoculture that absorbed other forms of production, there developed a semi-feudal society with a minority of whites and light-skinned mulattoes dominating patriarchally and polygamously from their big houses of stone and mortar. Not only the slaves that were bred so prolifically in the senzalas, but the sharecroppers as well, the tenants or retainers, those who dwelt in the huts of mud and straw, vassals of the big house in the strictest meaning of the word, conquerors in the military and technical sense of the indigenous populations, the absolute rulers of the Negroes imported from Africa for the hard labor of the bagaceria. The Europeans and their descendants, meanwhile, had to compromise with the Indians and the Africans in the matter of genetic and social relations. The scarcity of white women created zones of fraternization between conquerors and conquered, between masters and slaves. With these relations between white men and colored women did not cease to be those of superiors with inferiors, and in the majority of cases those of disillusioned and sadistic gentlemen with passive slave girls, they were mitigated by the need that was felt by many colonialists of founding a family under such circumstances and upon such a basis as this. So I'm going to move on from here, and you see that the difference in availability of certain women produced certain phenotypes among the people, right? Mestizos or half black mulattoes, right? So moving on. This is jumping out of the preface into some of the information surrounding uh, the Portuguese who are said to be of mixed heritage. With this antecedent factor of a general nature, the bicontinentalism, or better, the dualism of culture and race, there are other subordinate factors that call for our special attention. One of these is the presence among the elements that united to form the Portuguese nation of individuals of Semitic origin or stock, right? And he goes on to cite 18 here, where he says Fonseca Cardoso verifies anthropologically the presence of Semedo-Phoenician element in the population of present-day Portugal, and Professor Mendes Correia emphasizing the ethnogenic role of the Jews in the formation of Portuguese society, right? If we're talking Portugal and we're talking the original inhabitants of Portugal, you're talking about the seed of Japheth. However, we do know that Israelites sojourned in Portugal, right? That's a historical fact, and were forced out of Portugal into West Africa. From the point of view of social history, the definitive study of the Israelite infiltration into Portugal is that by J. Lucio de Azevedo, excuse me. All right. So it says individuals endowed with a mobility and plasticity and adaptability, social as well as physical, that are easily to be made out in the Portuguese navigator and cosmopolitan of the 15th century. Cites 19. D.G. Delgado, in his study The Climate of Portugal, lays emphasis on the fact that the Portuguese acclimatized themselves in various parts of the world better than almost all the other European races. Possibly, and this is the opinion of many persons as gathered by Delgado, the explanation lies in the great admixture of the people of the country with the Semitic race. Emil Beringer, in his studies in the climate and mortality in the capital of Pernambuco, translated by Manuel Duarte Pereira, Pernambuco, 1891, states that the Portuguese race appears to be endowed with a temperament that permits it to adapt itself more easily than other races to climates that are different from that of the mother country. This quality is to be attributed not only to the crossing of the Portuguese with the Israelites, who had found domicile in Portugal after their expulsion and who possessed a notable aptitude for acclimatization. That's funny because the people who are considered to be Israelites now don't have that ability. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. It is to be attributed also to the persisting influence of Negro blood, which was widely diffused in Portugal during the period when in our own country, the slave was flourishing. And by his own country, he means obviously Brazil, right? E. Herman Watgen stresses the point that the strong feeling of the Dutch against the Jews in Pernambuco, which practically accounted to anti-Semitism, was in part due to the fact that the Israelites acclimated themselves with astonishing facility, whereas it was extremely difficult for the Flemish to adapt themselves to a life of the tropics. So what is he saying? He's saying that due to admixture, The Portuguese, who were noticeably mixed, according to his account, were much more fit for the environment of Brazil than the Portuguese were, right? But again, what does this have to do with certain haplotypes being fixed in the population? We'll see. Hereditarily predisposed. Oh, oh, man, I hate when I do that. Predisposed to a life in the tropics by a long tropical habit, it was the Semitic element, mobile and adaptable as no other, that was to confer upon the Portuguese colonizer of Brazil some of the chief physical and psychic conditions for success and for resistance. Including that the economic realism from an early date tended to correct the excess of the military and religious spirit in the formation of Brazilian society. This mobility was one of the secrets of the Portuguese to victory. Without it, it was not to be explained how a country that was practically uninhabited, with a population that was numerically insignificant, this is Brazil, as a result of all the epidemics and famines, and especially wars that had affected the peninsula. Oh no, I'm sorry, it's not Brazil. He's talking about the peninsula, Portuguese, Portugal. In the Middle Ages, should have succeeded virally besparking with what was left of its blood and culture population so diverse and at so great a distance from one another in Asia, in Africa, in America, and in the numerous islands and archipelagos. The scarcity of manpower was made up for by the Portuguese through mobility and miscibility, by dominating enormous spaces, and whenever they might settle in Africa or in America, taking wives and begetting offspring with a procreative fervor that was due as much to violence instincts on the part of the individual as it was to a calculated policy stimulated by the state for obvious economic and political reasons. Individuals of worth, warriors, administrators, technicians, were shifted about by the colonial administration in Lisbon like pieces on a backgammon board, from Asia to America, and from there to Africa, depending on the exigencies of the moment or of the region. To Duarte Coelho, grown rich from his stay in India, John III entrusts the new Capitina of Percanumbo. His sons, trained in fighting in the American Indians, are summoned to the more difficult wars in Africa. From Madeira, technicians in the manufacture of sugar are sent to the plantations of North Brazil. Ships employed in trade with Indies are made use for commerce with the American colony. From Africa, whole nations almost of Negroes are transported for agricultural labor in Brazil. An astounding mobility, an imperial domain achieved by an all but ridiculous number of Europeans running from one end to another of the known world as in a formidable game of puss in the corner. As to their miscibility, no colonizing people in modern times has extended so much as equaled the Portuguese in this regard. From their first contact with women of color, they mingled with them and procreated mestizo sons. And the result is and the result was that a few thousand daring males succeeded in establishing themselves firmly in possession of a vast territory and were able to compete with great and numerous peoples in the extensions of their colonial domain and the efficiency of their colonizing activity. Miscibility, rather than mobility, was the process by which the Portuguese made up for the deficiency in human mass or by volume in the large-scale colonization of extensive areas. For this, they had been prepared by the intimate terms of social and sexual intercourse on which they had lived with the colored races that had invaded their peninsula or were close neighbors to it, one of which, the Mohammedan faith, or the Moors, was technically more highly skilled and possessed an intellectual and artistic culture superior to that of the blonde Christians, right? Now watch what he says here. Long contact, next page. Let's read this 22 or 21. Right, 21. If the Portuguese were able to achieve so great a mobility, this was owing their near perfection considering the era which the technique of maritime transportation had attained in that country. Perfection and abundance of vessels in compensation for the scant human material, notes C. Malheiro Diaz. Portugal possessed, as did no other nation in the first decades of the 16th century, abundant means of maritime transport, right? 22. The conquest of Brazil stresses the part due to the fact, no, stresses the fact that the Brazilian colonizer, before exerting an imperial sway over colored races, had in his own turn experienced the domination of a dark-skinned people superior to the Hispano-Goths in organization and technique. This is talking about the Moors. Under such circumstances, writes Nash, it would be deemed an honor for the white to marry or mate with the governing class, the brown man, instead of the reverse. Right? So you can see how perception governs acceptance, and with that, you get admixture events that are seemingly fixed into society, right? Because if the dark skinned races are the preferred race, then everybody's mating with the dark skinned races, and you get that phenotype fixed in your society. And it happens the other way around as well, right? And we'll see that here very shortly. Thank you for being patient. Rudiger Billedin, Brazil Laboratory of Civilization in the Nation, New York, 1929, likewise emphasizes the fact that the relations of the Portuguese with the colored peoples had begun under circumstances unfavorable to the whites. All right. He is referring obviously to the historical phase of the matter. And we'll read some more of this. The enchanted Moorish woman in Portugal, right, is a real thing. Long contact with the Saracens had left with the Portuguese the ideal figure of the enchanted Moorish woman, a charming type, brown-skinned, black-eyed, enveloped in sexual mysticism, roseate rivers, or roseate in hue, and always engaging in combing out her hair or bathing in rivers or in the waters of haunted fountains. And the Brazilian colonizers were to encounter practically a counterpart of this type in the naked Indian woman. Right? So they fetishized the enchanted Moorish woman and did the same with the naked Indian woman with their loose flowing hair. These latter also had dark tresses and dark eyes and bodies painted red, and like the Moorish Nereids, were extravagantly fond of a river bathing to refresh their ardent nudity, and were fond too of combing their hair. Right? I'll read this citation. To the enchanted Moorish woman in Portugal, Leitz de Vasconcelos points out, is ascribed to the role of divinity of the waters. According to the studies of this eminent investigator and those of Consigliere Pedrosos in Amoras Encantadas, the enchanted Moorish woman, and Luis Chaves in Lendas de Portugal, The belief was common among the people that these creatures put in appearance almost always by the side of fountains and were to be seen combing their hair, sometimes with golden combs. There is similarly a common belief to the effect that the Moorish women not only went clad in roseate garments, but were in the habit of drawing near to those who showed them a red kerchief or something red. All these circumstances would appear to confirm the assumption that these women were an expression of sexual or erotic mysticism, a species of cult of the colored woman or of the dusky Venus among the Portuguese. So they fetishize these women, right? So page 12, where are we? 13. What was more, they were fat like the Moorish women, only they were a little less coy, and for some trinket or some or other or a bit of token broken mirror would give themselves with legs spread far apart to the cariabas, who were so gluttonous for women, so the fornicators. In opposition to the legend of the enchanted Moorish woman, although it never attained the same prestige, there evolved that of the Moorish hag. So now, instead of fetishizing these Moorish women, the enchanted Moorish woman, a societal shift occurs where now, there's an evolving idea of a Moorish hag. Representing it may be an outlet for the blonde woman's sexual jealousy toward her colored sister. Then there were outbreaks of religious hatred, with the blonde Christians from the north pitted against the dark skinned infidels, a hatred that was later to result in the idealization throughout Europe of the blonde type as identified with angelic and divine personages, to the detriment of the brunette type, which was associated with evil and fallen angels, with the wicked, and with traitors. One thing we know is that in the 15th century, when ambassadors were sent by the Republic of Venice to the two Spains bearing greetings to King Philip II, the envoys noticed that in Portugal, certain women of the upper class were in the habit of dyeing their hair blonde, while both there and in Spain, a number of them painted their faces white and red tint by way of rendering their skin, which is a trifle swarthy, which is indeed quite swarthy, more fair and rosy, being persuaded that all swarthy skinned women are ugly, right? So this is how certain phenotypes get fixed into a population when the population shifts its appetite and affinity and reverence for a certain group. And you see that here today. I mean, in this society, I live in America, and most, you can look back. I mean, I'm pretty sure about 20, maybe 30 even years ago, they were postulating that the American population will be an intermixed breed, much like a mulatto, right? Because that's what happens when population dynamics shift. You can get a certain phenotype fixed into a population based on your preference. And so, again, all this was just to show that number one, in my estimation, CF and all downstream haplogroups, irregardless of skin color and phenotype, are the sons of Japheth. And how does Japheth go from being a brown skinned man to a white skinned man? Is through admixture, right? And just to go back really quick and revisit this article, this has been an hour and 33 minutes. So I appreciate you listening. Chop this up, break this up in pieces if you need to. Oh, that's not what I'm looking for. This article again goes into the mixing of the white hunter gatherers, the Anatolian farmer, and the Russian steppe peoples, right? And I'll just read this to close it out because they talk about Cheddar Man and Otzi the Iceman, right? And this is a recent publication from Stanford.edu. Uh, where can I start here? Cheddar Man, they talk about Cheddar Man. And I would just encourage you all to look this article up and you can read it for yourself. Starting on page probably 252, they also talk about the aptitude of Tibetans uh, to, you know, in this gene here to encode or to breathe at high altitudes better. Uh, better level in performance at high altitude. So I've read this, but instead of belaboring this video and going on and on and on, you can read this article for yourself. I might post this in link in the I don't even know what to call it, in the comments or in the under the header of the video. But again, my point is that we're gonna do more exploration on this topic. I plan on doing more exploration on this topic, and I plan to, you know, elaborate my and elucidate my points as best I can. So thank you for watching, and I appreciate it. Peace.